As this novel progresses, the first thing that we will understand is that Tristram Shandy is not at all a novel. It is called an anti-novel because it does not have the typical conventions of a novel. It has many digressions in the form of opinions, and we will examine this. As an introduction, it has to be said that without some warning about this so-called Shandian system of digressing and of betraying the normal conventions of the novel, or rather we can say that this novel lacks a kind of a system. Tristram Shandy can at first be rather baffling because anyone who reads it expecting to find some similarity to other 18th century novels will be disappointed. Now, for Sterne, this work is almost wholly unconventional, an experiment in a new kind of writing, though aspects of Sterne's style find their roots in earlier literature. In particular, this author admires and acknowledges his debt to the fantastic episodes, the incredible catalogues and body asides of the French master humorist of the 16th century, François Rabelais. Francois Rabelais, François Rabelais, the author of Gargantua and Pantagruel. Hardly less important is the picturesque humor and romantic digressions of the Spanish writer Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. And to complete the acknowledged debts, Sterne bows to the discursive and highly personal essays of the French author Michel de Montaigne and his English counterpart Robert Burton, the creator of The Anatomy of Melancholy. All of these writers experimented with new literary forms, and Sterne takes license from their freedom. He writes a book which deals not with actions but rather with opinions. Among 18th century novelists, we have to remember that Laurence Sterne stands out as one of the most engaging and at the same time one of the most puzzling figures. If we were to form an estimate of him based upon the remarks of his contemporaries, we would find not a single portrait but a bewildering variety of them. To some of his friends, Sterne was the hard-working and ambitious parish clergyman and a small landowner. To others, the companion of riotous nights spent in drinking and telling tall tales. To still others, the brilliant and incisive political pamphleteer. A surprisingly large circle of elegant women thought of him as the soulful, sentimental, and occasionally passionate suitor, while his London friends, looking at him in the light of his great work, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, a Gentleman, perceived the witty and eccentric clergyman and accomplished socialite equally ready to make the drawing room weep with a romantic tale or set it roaring with a bawdy one. All of these pictures of Sterne are true ones. He was a man with an extraordinary diversity both of talents and of masks which he presented to the outside world. Part of the confusion which surrounds Sterne has its origin in the contrast between the relative conventionality of his life and the wild unconventionality of his work. To understand this fascinating man, we must first look at the age that produced him, which was itself an age of contradictions. England during Sterne's life, that is from 1713 to 1768, that is the period of Sterne's life, was very prosperous, class conscious, beginning to realize the influence as an international power. The English had a strongly developed sense of national identity and pride, but there were threats to stability as a result of religious divisions between Presbyterians, who were dissenters, Catholics, and members of the Church of England, that is the established church, and because of the political rivalry between Whigs and Tories. The established church, with its Episcopalian religious tenets, was supported by the government. Its clergymen formed a solidly entrenched class, fiercely jealous of its rights and privileges. The decision to enter the church was rarely a call to the religious life, but far more often simply a method of making a living without excessive effort, and often a very prosperous one. Appointments to a parish church were often controlled by local magnates or the nobility. A clergyman with influence could frequently get himself appointed rector of a number of parishes, thus collecting the fixed income connected with each church, while appointing a subordinate at a nominal wage to do the actual parish work. This custom was called pluralism, and although religious reformers objected to it, it was an accepted and very widespread practice. The average reader is first confused by the peculiarities of Sterne's style, then amused by it, and finally intrigued by the possibility that it may have some relation with what, in the larger sense, the author is trying to say. The author certainly does intend us to be amused at his multitude of digressions, his habit of jumping from one subject to another, but the style of Tristram Shandy also provides us with a hint of Sterne's own view of life. Laurence Sterne's style is one of his chief sources of humor, and the amusement lies largely in the fact that he is continually defeating our expectations and confronting us with the unexpected. He tells us a sentimental story, and just when we expect to be reduced to tears by the ending, he figuratively thumbs his nose at us and makes us laugh. Yet this continual reversal of what we look forward to can also give us an insight into Sterne's more serious attitudes. He tells us repeatedly, with a perfectly straight face, that there is nothing fantastic about his tale. It is simply a view of what life is like. If for once he is telling us the truth, then life for Sterne does not continue in a straight line, but insists on going off in all sorts of directions, despite our attempts to control it. The more we think about this proposition, at least under Sterne's influence, the more we realize that it is true. In the same way, the characters of Tristram Shandy seem unable to keep their thoughts under any sort of control. One thought continually brings up another which is related to it only by some indirect association, and this in turn starts a whole new train of ideas. Gradually we realize that we think in the same way. By means of his style, Sterne can make fun of conventional ideas of cause and effect and of logic itself. He is constantly whispering to us, "You think your life is so logical, but is it really? Of course not." At the same time, the author makes fun of our ideas of time. As he points out, it may have taken him several days to write a chapter. That is his time. We, the readers, may read it in half an hour. That is our time. But the chapter itself may describe the thoughts which are going through a character's mind in an instant. That is the character's time. Now all these different intervals deal with the same set of events. Which is the true amount of time which has elapsed? The time of the writer, the reader, or the characters? Sterne loves to set us such unanswerable conundrums to prove that seemingly logical questions do not have equally logical answers. Of course, the Shandian style is also useful in a purely mechanical way. He can use it to put off the climax of a story indefinitely and thus raise our suspense. It can also be utilized to prolong the book indefinitely until it seems as if Sterne is making good on his promise to keep on writing forever. Therefore, the Shandian style is an integral part of Sterne's work. It reflects the nature of the man, as any good style must, and it enables him to amuse us and to put forward his own ideas in an unusually effective way. In portraying these three characters, that is Tristram, his father, and Uncle Toby, Sterne had in mind the theory of the humours, the idea that most men are controlled by a ruling passion. This ruling passion is determined in part by the stars under which we are born, according to Laurence Sterne, and more directly by our physical makeup, which is related to heredity. According to 18th century ideas of heredity, It would be logical to expect all three men of the Shandy family to pursue a single interest or idea to excess, though the direction these interests took might be completely different. All three are variations on the same basic character. In the case of Walter Shandy, his ruling passion is the love of philosophy, of speculation, and theorizing. He respects theories so much, particularly the theories of the ancients, that he tries to apply them to the problems of everyday life, whether they are whether they are really appropriate or not. And the results are disastrous. Now, Uncle Toby, though he is sensible in other directions, he has an attraction to the military arts, particularly to fortification, approaching madness. He tries to interpret everything he sees or hears in military terms, to the annoyance of his brother. Tristram's guiding impulse is a little harder to pin down, but as we read the book, it becomes clear. Young Tristram, after all, is the one who is telling the story, and his passion is the one that rules the novel, unreason or illogic. He follows this principle as faithfully as his father follows reason. Sterne has a into human nature. He makes Tristram's ruling passion the opposite of his father's. As a final characteristic linking the main figures of the novel, we should notice that all three have the same basic amiability or love of mankind. Walter's expression of this state of mind is somewhat masked by his apparent peevishness, what Sterne calls his sub-acid drollery. But his essentially good heart shines through. For example, he does not fly into a rage at the successive catastrophes to his son, Tristram, but accepts them resignedly. He calls this philosophy, but it is really good humor. If the Shandys, father and son and uncle, are divided by their passions, they are also united by their benevolence.